And this is a type of question you might get in paper 2 GCSE about fetch execute. So this is for the 8525 spec for AQA. It's very tempting when you get a question like this to just say, well, the instruction's fetched or we're getting something, but you're not going to get something for saying it's fetched because the fetch is already in the question. So we need to think about what actually happens. So we might say that the instruction is brought to the CPU from RAM, or we could call that main memory, of course, because that's also what it is. So what we're saying here is the instruction that we're fetching, it's being brought to the CPU. So I've got 2 marks here. I've got one for saying it's brought to the CPU and one for saying that it comes from RAM. So there's my 2 marks on that one. So the decode, the temptation is to say the instruction is decoded. Well, yes, it is, but again, that's not going to be enough for this. So we've only got 1 mark to get here. So we need to say that the operation that the instruction refers to is determined, or something like this. Or we could say this in slightly less wordy English, perhaps. We could say something like the operation required is determined, or is found out. We're trying not to use the word decoded. Also, don't be confused. Decode is nothing to do with encryption. So it's not to do with it. I know sometimes we talk about decoding something in encryption, but this is a different thing. It's not to do with encryption. So then finally, we've got this execute idea. So we need 2 marks for this execute. So we can say that the operation is carried out. And results are written back to RAM. And that's where we're going to get our 2 points. So the operation is carried out, or something like that, and the results are written back to RAM. We can also say something like more information may be fetched or may be brought from RAM if we want to as well, because we might need to do that for the operation. If the operation is for an addition or something like that, we might need to fetch 2 numbers and then execute those by adding them together using the ALU. You don't have to mention the ALU in here, but you can do if you want to, if you're doing a specific example. So there's another 2 marks there, one for saying the operation is carried out and one for saying this idea of results being written back to RAM. So that's the 2nd mark, which is probably the most difficult one to get from here. So when we're faced with a question like this, we're not needing anymore in GCSE to discuss all of the registers and everything else that's involved in Fetch Decode Execute. But if they ask us to generally outline what's happening, we can't be just using the word fetch, decode, and execute and saying the instruction's fetched, the instruction's decoded, the instruction's executed, because we're not going to get the points for that. But if we think about it in this way, try not to use those words, we're probably going to do okay.